Now let's take a look at the floating function. What exactly is floating? Floating is nothing more than advancing the machine forward or backward through a design without actually sewing. We wouldn't necessarily do this for things like a thread break where we're only going back maybe 10, 15, or 20 stitches. It's really for moving larger distances, maybe a several hundred or several thousand stitches, or perhaps by color. The reason we would use the float function is perhaps we had a thread break and we didn't back up far enough, therefore we missed a section, or perhaps we're sewing and the thread started shredding a little bit, and therefore we didn't get the proper coverage of stitches and it looks very sparse in that area. We would perhaps want to go back over and sew that area again after we rethread the needle so that the thread covers the area properly. In this particular example, we're going to assume that we didn't back up far enough during a thread break and we missed an area. You'll notice that the thread is still connected, and anytime we have a situation like that, we always execute a trim first. So what we do is we press the trim button, and it tells us to press the start button to execute that trim. We now go into the float function. We press the float button, and we have several options for floating. We can float one stitch at a time if we don't actually pick one of these values. Or we can float 100, 1,000, 10,000, or by color. The way we do that is we pick one of these values, and then each time we press the start button, the machine would advance forward by that value. Each time we would press the stop button, it would go backward by that value. For this particular example, it looks like we need to move backward several hundred stitches. So while the cursor is on 100, we press the set button. You'll notice the display now says at the top, float 100 stitch, telling me that each time I press the stop button, it's going to back up 100 stitches. If I needed to go forward, each time I would press the start button, it would go forward 100 stitches. But in this case, we're going backward. So we press it once, and we did not go back far enough. So we press the stop button again. We're still not quite back far enough. We press it again, again, and one last time. Now we look like we're getting close. To check this, I like to take the presser foot, grab it from the thread guide, and lock it down. It makes it much easier to line up where we need to be. We're not quite back far enough, but I don't need to back up another 100 stitches, so I would press the previous button, and now I'm going to back up by individual stitches. We always want to make sure we're far enough back because, again, the reason we're doing this is to repair an area. So we don't want to try and repair it and then have to go back and repair it again. Now that we're back far enough, we hit the previous button to come out of the float function and press start. Once we have repaired the area that was missing, we don't want to sew over an area that's already been sewn. So before I went into that trim and backed up, I went into the work information and took note of which stitch I left off on. I had left off on stitch number 6264. So now what I want to do is I want to float forward from the position that I'm at, which is at stitch number 5928, until I get to about stitch number 6254. Notice I want to go back approximately 10 stitches less than where I actually left off. thus giving me a nice amount of stitches to overlap to make sure I don't miss an area. If you'll notice, again, we've got a thread in the sewing field, so we want to trim it first. I press trim, then I press start. And now I go back into the float function. So I press float. I'm going to advance several hundred stitches. So while it's on 100, I press set. And now each time I press the start button, I will advance 100 stitches. So I'm at stitch number 5929, 6028, 6128, 6228, and we want to get to about 6254. So another 100 would put me too far, so I would hit previous. Since I don't have anything selected in this menu, I'm going to be moving one stitch at a time. And now I'm advancing until I get to stitch number 6254. I hit previous to come out of the float function, press start, and my design is repaired. I could use this exact same technique to float by one of those other values, such as color. One little note, if you are floating by color and you want to go forward, each time you press the start button, it will advance you forward one color. However, if you're in the middle of a color and you press the stop button, it brings you to the beginning of the color that you're in first, and then each time after that you press the stop button, it will move you backward one color change.